The Wealth Equation podcast by Maurice L. Wilson reveals how to accelerate your wealth and secure more money, time, and freedom by leveraging the investment powers of real estate, entrepreneurship, the stock market, and more. Tune in as host Maurice L. Wilson, an engineer turned financial advisor, offers you a step-by-step formula to solve your wealth equation once and for all. Here's Maurice.
It's just very simple, and none of our advisors are incented to behave in ways that so many advisors are incented out there in the universe.
True.
And people don't understand it because, some people are like, well, wait, what if I bring in lots of clients?
Right.
Well, then I assure you, if you bring in lots of clients, your salary will not stay where it is. But it doesn't matter that you've used product X versus product Y, or that you're generating a certain amount of revenue. We are not tying it to that.
Right.
We also, most of our advisors have come in, half of them have come in straight out of college.
Okay.
To an apprenticeship where they're spending 5 years with us, salaried, before they're sitting in front of clients by themselves.
Wow. You
All
ain't covered that. Wow.
So imagine this. You're 22 years old,
Mhm.
and firm A over here says, oh, write down a list of 100 or 200 people we're going to teach you a sales script, call them all and sell them something.
Yeah.
No. At our shop, it's come in, learn the business, be in investment operations, get your licenses, begin your CFP education, start doing meeting prep, start sitting in meetings with clients, doing the note taking, doing the wrap up, doing client communication, be second chair in the session so that every meeting has two advisors in it. One who is the seasoned senior person who's rendering the advice, and one who's making sure that it all gets done and gets handled properly and is learning along the way.
Right.
And by the time they're ready to take on client relationships, they've already been in meetings with these people for 2 and 3 years and exchanged emails and been on phone calls, and they're already comfortable, and the transition is natural. So that they don't have to go out and sell anything to anyone. They can just work with the families they already know, who already understand what they're about. And now their career has taken a turn, and they are lead advisors. Now, this only works if the firm is generating enough new clients to feed all those advisors.
Right.
Hence the podcast and all the publishing and speaking. I mean, my job is to make rain.
Right.
And if I'm making rain, if I'm attracting people to the firm, we then need lots of buckets to catch the rain.
Right.
Because there's only so much that I can do. So we have 10 advisors here.
Right.
We have clients in 37 states. We have 10 advisors, and we work with folks across the spectrum. There's a couple other things. We don't have a minimum asset level.
Okay.
And advisors are like, what do you mean? You should only be working with folks who have $1 million or more, or whatever it is. And I have too many people we represent who had $50,000 with us and paid for a basic financial plan, and then inherited money or changed jobs or got married or something happened, and now they're $2 and $3 million clients.
True. That's true.
And they weren't gonna, if I had said, hey, thanks, but we won't work with you, they weren't gonna say, hey, now I have enough money, can I work with you, please?
That is true too.
They're gonna say, to heck with that guy.
Yeah.
So our younger advisors can work with families who are up and coming. We work with a lot of Henrys. You know what Henrys are? You heard that? High earners, not rich yet. People who have the ability to generate some wealth, but need the knowledge. They don't have the time. They don't have the acumen. Maybe just don't like doing it, and that's okay.
Right.
Maurice, I'm gonna drop a little wisdom on everybody that you're gonna find surprising, and so are they. And that is that not everybody needs a financial advisor.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Not everybody needs one.
Yes.
I think outcomes tend to be better when you have an advisor, even if it's just an accountability partner.
Right. Right.
I look at it as I have a trainer. If I didn't have a trainer, I would not work out. Because if I have an appointment at 4:00, I'm going to be at the gym at 4:00. If I don't have an appointment at 4:00, I'm going to have something more fun to do at 4:00.
That's true. That's true. True.
And if I'm at the gym and I'm feeling a little sleepy, my workout will be shorter unless I have somebody barking orders at me.
True. True.
Well, this is no different. If you know you've got a meeting with your financial advisor and you said you were going to pay off that credit card and you were going to start funding your 401k and you were going to meet with an attorney to get a basic will done,
Mhm.
and you show up at that meeting and you haven't done any of those things, you're going to feel a certain way.
Yes.
And so knowing that there's a meeting in 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, there's a due date for this homework,
Mhm.
people get it done. And and this is, I'm not saying this in any punitive way. I'm saying I'm the same way.
Oh yeah.
You know, if I know that I need this by next week, it'll be done by next week. If it's get to this when you feel like it, it might never happen.
Oh no. Redoing my closet, redoing my home office are things that I want to do for myself, but there's nobody making me do it. And you know who that person would be in our households, and they aren't making me do it. So it just keeps getting pushed down the calendar. And you're right. I mean, one of the principles of influence, and I might fumble this, I think, is reciprocity, where you ask somebody to do something, and because you ask them to do it, it kind of puts them on the hook versus you expecting them and not kind of formalizing it. So I think it's like when you make the reservation at the restaurant and they ask you to call and cancel, versus just not having any policy in place. So, and I do find that clients do tend to apologize a lot when they don't do certain things to me. And I hadn't thought about it in the way you just described, because you're like, hey, you're human, but they feel like they've let you down, and so they do want to hold themselves accountable going forward. So yeah,
they want to exceed expectations.
That's true too. That's true too.
If they set a goal that I want to be mortgage free by 2024 and it was 2018 and you've got 6 years, now you got 5, now you got 4, now you got, and so how do we help you get there? Here's the track. If you want to be financially independent in 2042, and that's an arbitrary number, I'm making this up, but if you said by 2042 I'm going to be X years old, I want to be done, you can instantly calculate, here's what you'd need to put away based on a reasonable rate of return and certain assumptions. This is what you'd need to put away. Now you mentioned the Roth IRA, and I think this is interesting too.
Okay.
Whether you inherit money or whether you invest money or however you receive it in your life, a dollar is not a dollar. They're not all the same.
Okay.
If you have an IRA, you have a balance in an account that still has a mortgage on it.
Oh, I like that.
Okay. If you have an IRA account that's $1 million and you have a Roth IRA account that's $1 million, they are not the same.
No, they're not.
Now, people tend to find this out the hard way a lot of times. Sometimes they find out about it after they go through a divorce, and one party really messes with the other party because they're like, "Oh, you each get $1 million." Well, that wasn't particularly fair. Somebody pulled one over on you, right?
Right.
They're different because the Roth is spendable money, and the IRA still has a mortgage on it. But unlike a mortgage you sign up for on your house, the mortgage is unknown. What are the tax rates going to be in 2041? Are they going to be higher or lower? Where are you going to be living?
That's true.
Are you going to be living in California or Florida?
It's true.
Are you going to pay 12 or 13% at the state level or 0?
That's true.
Are you going to be in a high bracket or a low bracket? How are you going to use this money? Do you know what tends to happen? IRAs get built up, 401ks get built up, and then people have required distributions.
Yep.
And the age keeps getting older. It was 70 and a half for a long time. Now it's going up to 75.
Yeah.
And I don't know about your clients, but our clients, a lot of times they get to where they have the required distributions and they're angry because they don't want to pay taxes.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And what our job now has to be is not only do we want them to use this money smart, in a smart way, we don't want them to wait till RMDs to do it.
Right.
We want to play that tax planning game. How can we use some of these dollars and replace dollars that have a mortgage on them with dollars that are paid off?
All day.
Okay. And if you have an estate tax issue, now the federal estate tax right now requires you to be ultra wealthy, and most people are not near that, although it could be changing January 1.
Right.
but every state is different. And in the glorious state of Maryland, we have the unfortunate condition of being the only state in the U.S. that has both an estate tax and an inheritance tax.
Okay.
Both, which is my way of saying they get you coming and going. So Um, if you're going to lose some money
Mhm.
to the government instead of going to your kids,
Mhm.
that requires some planning.
Yes.
I also know there's a lot of people out there who don't understand what's going to happen when they leave money behind.
No, they don't. I'm trying to tell
And
them.
I don't know.
Mhm,
My daughter, God love her, she's 15 years old.
mhm.
Anything I leave her right now, of course, is in trust. If
Right.
it wasn't, she'd be getting it at 18.
Right.
I don't know what you were like at 18, but if a bunch of money fell in my lap at 18, it would
Oh, yeah.
not have gone well because I didn't have the wisdom, the maturity, or the acumen. I would have messed it up royally.
Right.
All
Right.
right. And that doesn't necessarily change with age. I know
Mm.
it's going to sound strange, but some people are great with money.
That's
Some
true.
people aren't.
That's
And so
true.
if you've got kids who are 35 and they're not great with money, or maybe they're great with money, but they're married to somebody who isn't.
That's true. That's true.
All right.
Mhm.
The reason to use trust, you said trusts aren't only for wealthy people, and it's true. Trusts are protecting people from themselves
Yep.
or from predators and creditors.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. Predators in the form of a nefarious spouse. There's a reason why 23-year-old people sometimes marry 80-year-old people. I'm not saying it's not love. I'm not going there on the show, but there could be, there might be other considerations. I'm just saying. Um, so so you have to protect people from that.
Mhm.
And you get money to your kids or grandkids, you want to keep it in the family line. You don't want to lose it because one of your kids marries a knucklehead.
It's true. I, that's true. That's true. I mean,
And that's why the planning makes a difference.
definitely, definitely, definitely. No, I mean, and that actually brings me to something I wanted to ask you because you got
Yeah.
the Henrys, I've got the Henrys, and then
Yeah.
we've got the people this, and I feel like what people don't understand, people associate financial problems with just people like being broke and in debt. But you and I probably can attest that actually the problems increase as the income increases in terms of mismanagement. I would also say, just like you said, they think they'll be making this money forever, lifestyle creep, and then just not planning their dollars. Like, the dollars with the mortgage, I love that. I'm going to borrow it versus the dollars without the mortgage. I have a lot of clients in that space, right?
Mhm.
What have you seen that has worked to effectively communicate to that crowd? Hey, this is serious. We need to plan. You're not always going to be in the chips, as they say. Can you break through? I guess is what what cuts through the noise with that crowd? You think?
There's a couple ways to look at that too.
Mhm.
First, people confuse income and wealth.
Mm,
They're not the same.
mm,
Um, and I know people, I've met plenty of people who have incomes that are off the charts, but
mm,
couldn't rub two nickels together if they had to. And I
mm.
know other people who have had what I would consider a relatively modest income and they've built massive net worths
Yeah.
and we talked about behavior. The income in and of itself is not the same as wealth. You sometimes read, oh, this is the wealthiest state in the country. No, it's not. It's the highest income state, but they take most of it.
Right.
So there's that. The second thing is that you talk about where problems amplify with money. I would say complexity amplifies. I don't know that there's necessarily problems.
Good point.
I think things become more complex because there are more facets to the conversation. Now you have to look at taxes in different ways. Now you have to look at how one decision impacts another.
Right.
At the lower end of the spectrum, you have to understand how a certain income might impact, for example, financial aid.
Right.
If you've got kids and they're getting ready to go to school and you're in a position where you're going to apply for financial aid, that might not be the time to start that side hustle and ramp your income up by just enough that the college goes, now you're on your own.
There you go. There you
All
go.
right, it's a simple example, but that's true. By the same token, you don't want to be in a position where you've got no tax diversification, and people think about diversification as just what their investments are.
Right.
There's
Right.
more to it. There's tax diversification, and we never know what the rules are going to be. Congress changes tax laws something like 800 times a year. It's
Yes.
the dumbest thing you've ever seen in your life.
Yes. Yes.
And the tax code, I think, is the longest book ever written. If I'm not mistaken, the U.S. tax code is, in fact, the longest book ever written. I challenge you to read it. You're better off with a prospectus. We talked about that. So if that's true, we don't know if a certain administration is going to say, we want to tax the heck out of capital gains because they're only for rich people.
Right.
Where now, if you were relying on accounts that had capital gains, you don't want to do that.
Right.
Or they say capital gains are great. We're not going to tax those anymore. We're only going to tax ordinary income. You say, oh my gosh, all my money's in an IRA. It's ordinary income.
Right.
You want to be able to play the game, and it is a game.
It is a game.
If you've played Monopoly, and I know you have, never with your grandmother because she always beat us.
Right.
But if you played Monopoly and you played at somebody else's house, did you ever notice how occasionally there were house rules?
Yeah, particularly in Uno as well. Particularly,
Okay.
yeah.
Did you ever play with somebody who changed the rules in the middle of the game?
Oh yeah.
That's what the government is doing constantly with our tax rules.
That is true.
They're changing the rules. So our job now is we have to plan based on what we know, which is what's here now.
Yeah.
I hear people making decisions based on what they think the government's going to do. I've heard people taking Social Security at 62 instead of waiting because they're afraid it's going to go away. Well, they might be right. They might be wrong. I think probably they should play with the rules they've got, not knowing what's coming. Right. There are people who will, capital gains rate. We talked about that. If you're relying on a step up in basis, and I don't mean to get technical, but if you've got an account and you've got $1 million worth of funds or stocks or whatever it is, and you paid $100,000 for it, and it's worth $1 million, and you sell it, you have to pay capital gains tax on $900,000.
All day.
If you die with it and you leave it to your daughter doesn't have to pay taxes on the $900,000 anymore.
That's true.
So what people are doing sometimes is they're gifting their daughter some of the shares where she doesn't get that step up, and it doesn't make sense. It's generous. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
People are so generous with charity.
Right.
People are so generous with charity, but the vast majority of people are doing it in an inefficient way. Most people with some resources should not be making charitable gifts with cash. Ever. Because if you have a mutual fund that grew and you can donate the fund, you can avoid the capital gain.
That's true.
What you don't want to do is sell the fund, pay the taxes, and then make the gift. And if you have that $1 million IRA and you leave it to your kids, your kids only have 10 years now.
Yep.
They have 10 years to spend the whole thing.
Yep.
If we live to be 93 and we leave a big IRA to our children who at the time are 65, our IRA could screw up their Medicare premiums.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about the way it can snowball, if you leave the IRA to charity, they pay nothing.
Right.
So, and QCDs, I'm assuming you're seeing some of these for older folks. They're qualified charitable distributions. Once you're 70 and a half, and of course that 70 and a half didn't change like the RMDs that did change, because why make it simple? but you can gift money right out of your IRA to charity. That is for anyone over 70 and a half. I can think of no better way to give to charity than that.
Right.
Because it counts toward your required distribution if you have one. Okay. It goes to the charity, and it avoids, not only does it avoid the ordinary income tax that you would be paying, it reduces your balance a little bit so that your required distributions won't be as big, so they won't cause you tax creep.
Yeah, you got a good point there.
All right. So what else has the government done in the last decade? Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, 2017. 2017, the government came in, and this is not a political statement because both parties are full of nonsense and they go back and forth all the time. But Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed the way people itemized on their tax returns, because it capped the SALT, the state and local income taxes got capped at $10,000. So people who were living in California or New York or Maryland who paid a lot of state income taxes used to be able to deduct that against the federal tax. And now they can't. So when that occurred, they also, to offset that, they raised the standard deduction pretty dramatically. That means something like 92% of people in this country now don't itemize. If you don't itemize, you don't deduct charitable contributions anymore. right? So now you're making a gift to charity, but unless you do some planning around it, you're not getting out. You can love the charity and want to do something nice, and that's a great thing. But if it's real money that you're donating to a charity, if this isn't what you put in the collection plate, but this is some real whatever, you plan around it. So now you have donor advised funds.
Yeah.
And donor advised funds allow you to take 5 years of a potential gift, put all of it in an account now, take the tax deduction, make sure you itemize, and then drip it out to the charity over a period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
People aren't, no one who's not in our business is keeping up with all this stuff. In fact, people in our business aren't keeping up with some of this stuff.
No, it's too much. I mean, that's the one thing about the business. I said problems, but you are right to say complexity. We've gone from mutual fund pushers and get out of debt people to everything you just talked, because you talked about Secure 2.0, Secure, the first one, all that happened since the pandemic, the 2017 Act, and then the donor advised. These are all things that have really come on my radar in the last really 8 years, through application. But yeah, some people, they slam into it because they, kind of back into it, and if nobody's there to help them, they're just operating off an old playbook. It's something you constantly have to reevaluate. And you even said it might change again in January. So,
well, it may. In fact, I read an article today that talks about the House proposal and the Senate proposal, and they're different.
Yep.
And so even how this potentially changes is going to be argued about for a while, and then they'll wait until the 11th hour, and then something will pass under the cover of darkness, and then we'll read about it and have to react the next day, because that's what Congress does, right? So in my estimation, we talked about tax diversification. In my estimation, one of the true paths to financial independence is having not only enough money to live on, adjusted for inflation in a way that you can't outlive it,
right,
but ideally in a way that also won't be impacted by dramatic tax code changes.
That's me all day.
Because do you remember in anything you studied over the years what the highest marginal income tax rate was in this country?
What is 90%? Am I right?
91. I think it was 91%. When they were making movies in black and white,
yep.
All right, and they had to pay for a war, the highest marginal tax rate was 91%. But the reason it was 91%, and the way that they got away with that, because I would say, well, if the government's taking 91%, I'm not working anymore. I'd rather I'll live under a bridge. Thank you very much. But everything was deductible. Everything.
Okay.
So what it did was it created an entire generation of people who had to make this choice. Think about this choice when you get your check. I can either spend $1 or save 9 cents. They all spent the dollar.
Right.
And why not?
Right.
The reason that was important when paying for a war is that our gross domestic product is based mostly on consumer spending.
Okay.
Which means if people stopped spending money because they were afraid of wartime, it was going to hurt the economy, and that was paying for, among other things, the conflict.
Right.
I mean, do you remember after 9/11, do you remember one of the first things that George W. Bush told everybody to do? Buy cars.
Oh, wow. Okay. I don't remember. I remember getting the check he gave out. I don't remember the cars.
It was buy cars. Car interest rates on cars went to 0%. Okay. Everything was same as cash, because they knew that consumer spending was going to stop because there was fear.
Right.
So they had to incent consumers to spend, because if consumers aren't spending, our economy crashes.
Right.
Our economy is totally consumer driven, 70%.
Yep.
Government and business can't fix it. It's all about the consumer. And when consumers are freaked out, they're not spending money. When there's fear, they're not spending money. When markets get real ugly or the recession happens. So what happened during the recession? Interest rates dropped to almost zero.
Right.
So that means, after that period of time, that means that money was cheap and people could borrow, which means people could buy houses.
Right. Yep.
If you ever feel like we're just marionettes and there's puppet masters with string, arguably it's true. And that's not conspiracy theory. It's just that that's what drives behavior.
Yeah. No, I mean, because everything you just said up to that point, that's how we got to the housing bubble, right? I mean, everything got to zero. Well, people started jumping into their houses, and we started farming out the loans and everything.
Well, yeah, and packaging it and selling it and not caring who paid it back.
Yeah, because all the homes could never fail.
Well, yes. And people who couldn't qualify for a Discover card were getting homes with 125% loan to value because they only go up.
There we go.
What could go wrong, Maurice? So I got a question for you, and I would never put you on the spot. It's your show. If you were on my show, I'd put you on the spot. But in my estimation, there are 4 places that most American taxpayers, I'm not talking about something esoteric, but most American taxpayers have 4 places I'm aware of where they can put money, where used properly, it's never taxed again, at least during their lifetimes and possibly thereafter.
I mean, what, life insurance, Roth IRA. I know. Well, I guess it's the Muni, but no, they're tax. I'm gonna go life insurance and Roth IRA. I'm gonna go 2 for 4.
That's 2. All right. So yes, and most people don't get the life insurance, but the permanent life insurance is in that way incredible. And in 2008, there were only 2 asset classes that made money. One was permanent life insurance, and the other was managed futures for people who were slinging natural resources and agriculture and precious metals. They had a great year. They haven't had a great year since, but they had a great year in 2008. So the other ones are the 529 plan.
Okay.
And the health savings account.
I always forget the HSA.
Don't forget the HSA.
Yeah.
Here's what I would say. The HSA is the most perfect tax vehicle ever invented. The HSA is an accident. It's a gift from Congress. Okay. And don't tell anybody because they'll change their minds. But here's how the HSA works for those who maybe don't have one or don't know how to use it.
Right.
The HSA is the only account that I know of where you can take a tax deduction for your contributions regardless of your income. You can grow the money tax-free and invest it. It doesn't have to sit in cash.
Right.
You can withdraw it tax-free so long as it's for medical care, but that can include Medicare premiums, long-term care, other types of things.
Yep.
Used properly, it's the only triple tax-free thing on the planet. You know how to screw it up?
I guess don't put
There's
money.
2 ways. There's 2 ways to screw up the HS. Well, 3.
Okay.
One is to pull money out for something other than medical care. That's a disaster, and don't do it. The second is to die with it. If you own an HSA when you die, it's 100%, unless it's to your spouse, it's 100% taxable the year you die. That's a terrible outcome. And lastly, don't confuse the HSA with the FSA.
And see, that's why I stay away, because I mean, you always have to, they did throw that wrinkle in where it's like, okay, you have an HSA or FSA, because it's very different. But go ahead.
The flexible spending account is use it or lose it with a very small carryover, a few $100. It's going to be in cash. You have to decide before the year what you're going to spend, and you can't change it during the year. And so you put a little bit of money away and you get a tax deduction for it. And then December rolls around and you wind up with 6 pairs of glasses that you don't need because you didn't spend it. However, there's also a flexible spending account for dependent care, which is a home run. Because if you are a single parent or you're in a 2-parent household and you've got kids in daycare, it allows you to put $5,000 a year into a plan that's pre-tax. You can essentially write off some of the daycare.
Right.
That's a big deal.
That's a big
Daycare's real expensive. So that's a big deal.
That'll cover some of daycare for 2 kids.
So HSAs you don't want to die with. 529s you can die with as long as the kids aren't the successor owners.
Okay.
You want to name successor owners who aren't the beneficiary so that it doesn't become an irrevocable gift. And if you do that, these can go on for generations. There's rules against perpetuity in trusts. Trusts are limited to 99 years. 529s don't have limits on them. You could essentially pass this down for 3 generations if you wanted to.
Now, I didn't, on that one with the 3 generations, does there have to be somebody under a certain age? Because no, okay, so it can just sit there.
No, first of all, there are people who are single and they're not even married yet. They don't have kids, and they're opening 529s for themselves because in their state they can get a deduction for the contribution. Some states do, And then you can change the beneficiary once a year. So once you have a kid, you name the child, and now you have an account that you've already started funding. You started paying for college before you got married. 529s are incredibly powerful, used properly. The other thing that they can do, if you've got grandparents out there,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I think most grandparents think their kids are rotten and their grandkids are perfect.
That is
Yep.
kind of consistent, yes.
Okay. So grandparents can put money away for their grandkids' education.
Mhm.
They're allowed to fund 5 years up front. So they don't have to use the annual gift exclusion. They can gift 5 years up front, put it in the account. It is outside of their taxable estate, and it's not an irrevocable gift. They can still take the money back if the kid turns out to be rotten or if they need the money.
Yeah.
Show me something where you can make a gift that's taxed like a completed gift that you can change your mind on,
Mhm.
and that's not included in your estate, even though you have control over it when you die.
Well, see, you are, because I have not delved this deep into 529 plans, and that's usually not my thing. I'm usually a nerd about a lot of this stuff. But one thing I took away from 529 plans, and maybe you can correct me on this might blow. But is there, I mean, I know there's a dollar limit, but nobody really
Yes.
knows what it is, right? And I always thought it looks like these are estate planning vehicles. That was my, in terms of like, you can chuck all this money in, you know,
Yeah.
and do different things with it, as long as you got somebody out there that can get it. And I guess you're kind of saying that in better ways than I'm saying, and it's kind of like right up under the rug. Nobody really talks about it. So,
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful estate planning tool.
okay,
It's a tax reduction tool.
Mhm.
It creates enormous opportunity for kids to avoid student loans and those kinds of things. It passes it down between one generation to the next,
Mhm.
income tax free and estate tax free if you do it right. There's ways to mess this up too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. It allows you now
Mhm.
to take up to $10,000 a year out of the 529 to pay for private school,
Oh, they updated that. Okay.
K to
Okay.
12.
Yeah.
So if you've got a kid in private school, and let's say your state allows you to deduct, like the state of Pennsylvania allows you to deduct up to $19,000. I think it's the full annual gift from the state of Pennsylvania's taxes. For example,
Mhm.
if you've got a kid in private school, you can literally fund a 529, put in $10,000, get
Mhm.
a state tax deduction, and pull it out 3 days later and pay it towards tuition. And you just got a tax break on your tuition legally.
That's true. That's true.
These rules are they're so absurd, but if you know how to use them, and none of these things are going to get you audited. We're not talking
No,
about anything that's in
no,
any way nefarious.
no.
I would never suggest that. My reputation is not something I'm willing to risk for anything like that. But these are things that if people understand how to do it,
Mhm.
there's some really, really thoughtful ways. There's upstream gifting, there's downstream gifting, there's charitable, there's split gifts, there's trust. I mean, no client gives a darn what the tool is.
That's true. They don't. It's alphabet soup.
It's here's what I would like to accomplish.
Mhm.
Maurice, I trust you to come up with a solution that will accomplish that. And you might come up with 4, and you can talk about which one works best, and there's pros and cons, and all that's great. They don't care what it's called.
Mhm.
You could call it green jello if it solves the problem. Really.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
So if that's true,
Mhm.
then our job is to not only communicate and educate
Mhm.
and advocate,
Right.
but it's also to motivate, because people have to take action.
That's true. That's
You
true.
know, and the Susie Ormans and Jim Cramers of the world are not educating people, they're entertainment. And, you know, I was once asked when I started my podcast, I was working with an agency that was trying to help figure out, I was like, what do you want to do? And what do you want? Why do you want to write books and do podcasts? And I said, because the world deserves better than Jim Cramer and Susie Orman. Why not me? That's literally what I said.
Yes. Yes.
Jim Cramer is entertaining, but if you were to take his advice, you'd be out of your mind.
That's true.
That's not to suggest there aren't people doing it and getting hurt by it.
Oh, yeah.
Susie Orman back in the recession, who was talking about all these various things. Actually, I believe, and you know, I don't want to besmirch the woman, because she could come after me all day long. But I believe at one point her entire portfolio was in muni bonds.
Yeah. I've heard something to that effect. Yeah.
So, and look, maybe that's a old wives' tale. Maybe it's a urban legend.
Mhm.
But if it's true, she was saying, thou shalt, but not for me.
Right. Right.
I own my own everything. Our investment committee, I own what our clients do. And I will tell you, if you've ever been in a restaurant where the chef won't eat,
Yep.
don't eat.
There you go. You're totally right. So, I mean, this has been great. This has been like one of my favorite sports guys. It's been a football meat sandwich, but it's been a lot of stuff. I mean, you really have, enlightened me on the HSA and the 529 plan. But for people who are going to, who are in these positions, how can they work with you? What kind of give me the litany of ways they can reach you, because you're so prolific. And I think it bears stating that you are, if I read your bio, aren't you an accredited estate planner? Do I have it right?
Yes.
So if you're
Yes.
wondering how Eric knows this, he's just a financial advisor. He is. Check out his bio. It's got an alphabet soup, but the estate planner stood out to me.
I took a lot of courses.
Yeah.
Early in my career, because I was 21, 22 years old. I came into this business. I was trying to start a practice primarily in life insurance.
Mhm.
And I looked 12. I mean, I didn't even shave every day at the time. And I'm trying to render financial advice. And as you know, that's nonsense. So I had to learn.
Right.
And I went to every class I could get my hands on. I had an employer at the time willing to pay for my schooling. I didn't take loans to do it. And I got every piece of education I could, because I knew I couldn't artificially grow gray hair or a bald spot, although I'm doing fine now. I couldn't artificially do that. I couldn't fake or make up wisdom or experience.
Right.
But I could know more than most of the people I was talking to.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is now I encourage our advisors to do that. And now I'm no longer trading on intelligence. I'm trading on wisdom, because I've seen it now.
Right.
That is a pendulum that has swung, where I'm now the old guy in the office who says, "Oh, I remember this from the 90s and da 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 da."
Right.
For me to suggest that I'm technically sound as somebody who just passed a CFP exam last month, I'm not.
Right.
But I've seen some of it before, so it makes a really good combination. So for folks who want to get a copy of the book, I'll shamelessly plug the book, because it's here.
Yes.
That is Don't Retire, Graduate. You can go to don'tretiregraduatebook.com and buy it. There's also a workbook with it. If you go through the workbook, you will wind up with a financial plan. And in fact, the book itself, I don't believe in homework. So even though it's written a little bit like it's a college curriculum, it's the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior years of your financial world. And that's how it's broken down. Every chapter ends with a quiz. They're not graded, and an extra credit assignment. Because I don't like homework, but everybody does the extra credit. So if you do those assignments, you will wind up with a financial plan. And some of the assignments are things like have a conversation with your parents, if they're living, about their care and what's important to them. This isn't all just, hey, here's how do you invest.
Right.
It's a lot more than that. And it really does walk you through, and it meets you where you are. So if you're a young person just getting started, definitely start at the beginning. If you're a grizzled veteran of these battles and you're trying to figure out what's next, you can skip some things. There's a couple chapters on how to get out of debt.
Right.
If you don't have debt, skip the class, go directly to the advanced lesson, right? So that's the book. You can also go to bfgfa.com. That is our company website. I think, Maurice, there's so many different kinds of investors and of families and of financial advisors. And ultimately, I think it's real important to find somebody you're comfortable with. And so the folks who are choosing you are often not going to choose me, and the folks who are choosing me are often not going to choose you, and that's okay. It's okay, because whatever folks are looking for, this is a relationship that is as it's really as intimate as medicine.
Right.
There's no disrobing in our office most of the time, but you have to have personal conversations. I mean, about the marital stuff, and about when there's a kid with a gambling issue or a drug problem or a lousy spouse or boyfriend or whatever. Like, you have to be transparent, and we're not therapists.
Right.
I don't know if you have a therapy degree of any kind, but I certainly don't. I'm not a therapist.
No,
but but we do deal with some messy stuff in life, the tragedies, the opportunities, the crossroads, do I take this new job, do I move to North Carolina for this, do I, what do I do with mom's house, do I take dad's car keys, I mean, whatever it is,
Right.
we wind up involved in those conversations, and so you need to find somebody you feel real comfortable talking to. That's all.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point about, it's so many, you're going to pick who you're comfortable with and blah, blah, and things of that nature. I feel like if I did pick an advisor and there was one guy who's like, I don't talk to other advisors, just me, I know everything, versus somebody that's, hey, I go to conferences, I learn from other people, I'm deep in my textbooks and whatnot. I'm gonna choose the latter. I just feel like we know this. The day you think you know everything, you're done. And so
Yeah.
when I talk to people like you, and I don't talk to a lot of other advisors until we go to conferences like later this year, I can bypass the education, like the table stakes education, and we can get deep into cases, right? Because that's where you benefit. And as you know, when we first met, I was a little leery of like, oh, how does it work with two advisors on the show? But now I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do this more often. Like,
Well,
because you definitely have more often things to like. So I just think I definitely think it's something that should happen more often.
well, I take that as a high compliment, and I've had a lot of financial advisors on my show, and and they're as long as they're doing the right thing by people, it comes down to comfort.
Yeah.
It comes down to and it's hard breaking up with a financial advisor. It's hard when somebody's got an advisor. They're real hesitant to go. The banking industry learned a long time ago that if they have 4 or 5 different lines of business with you, they can't leave.
Right.
It's a nuisance to change financial institutions.
Right.
And so you really have to feel like something's wrong.
Right.
You're uncomfortable, or there's really something significantly better. And so, I think trust your gut.
Right.
Trust but verify.
Right.
Look up the records, look up the compliance records and all the public thing, because some people are just wonderful salespeople, but not particularly good advisors.
It is a pleasure to have you join us for this episode of The Wealth Equation. Be sure to visit wilsonwealth.com for more information about building wealth. We look forward to helping you next time on The Wealth Equation.